Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we've got an early impression on a fragrance house, really a fragrance category and time period that is very true to my heart. And it's the House of Jill Sander. And this is going to be an early impression video. And I'm calling it an early impression because even though I've worn this to bed a couple times, I have given it a full wear today for the very first time. So this is not something that I have loads of experience with, but I want to get these videos out there because it's so important. There's almost no information on this on the internet. Very few people have done videos on it. And in fact, even when Rich Mitch and I were exchanging WhatsApp messages and talking about it, he sent me an eBay link and it was like, this one? And I said, no, that's Jill Sander Pure Man, not Jill Sander Man Pure, which is a completely different fragrance. So it can be all very confusing. But as you can see, I'm very excited because this is a fragrance that deserves to be in my collection. It's the kind of thing I love. It's the kind of thing I love to wear, but it's extremely hard to find. In fact, I think there was only one mini in England. I told Rich to get it because he needs to experience this. This is right up our alley. And this is a fragrance called Jill Sander Man Pure. Now, as you can see, this was a sample that was sent to me very kindly by Duncan, famous YouTuber. Thank you, Duncan. He sent this to me like 6 months ago. And, you know, when I did I did a couple videos. Actually, there's a playlist on the 2 Jill Sander videos that I've already done. They're back at the old setup in the old office. And, you know, I said a quote, and I want to reiterate that quote. I said, "No man is an island unto himself." And that's from John Donne. And, you know, the reason that I'm able to do this, the unboxing video from yesterday from Armando, the samples that you guys sent to me is amazing. It means more to me than any money you can contribute, any, you know, there's no super chat you could give me that means as much as this does to me, because what this represents is this represents an experience for me to be able to get my nose on a fragrance that I never would have been able to otherwise. And it's almost priceless to me because this is such a fragrance that is of its time, and yet it's indicative of the future. And I'll explain what I mean in just a moment when we go through the review. If you want background on the House of Jill Sander, if you want to learn more, go watch my other reviews. I did a little bit of background on her. I think on the, so I did 2. I did one on Man Pure. I'm sorry, I did one on Man 2, okay? And I really liked Man 2. Man 2 is another one that deserves to be in Ram's collection because it is right up my alley. It's the kind of thing I really love. And then I also did Woman 2, which is also something that's completely full bottle worthy. So the House of Jill Sander, it really gets me excited because modern designers don't do this. They don't do what the old Jill Sander fragrances did. And it really is an indication of how far the perfume industry has fallen, you know, straight on their face. And then they bounced and fell again. This is basically, here, before we, you know, dive into this, I want to give you the proper breakdown of how this makes me feel. And I want to give you the proper breakdown of what this fragrance is like. So it came out in 1981. And the perfumer is a gentleman named Jacques Artrate. And Mr. Artrate has done fragrance. I've never heard of any of his other fragrances. Actually, I have to, oh no, we have an issue with the server. Okay, so I won't be able to look anything up during the rest of this video, but that's fine, whatever. I don't need it. So basically, Mr. Artrate did a couple other things, but I'm not familiar with them, okay? And this fragrance is classified as a spicy, woody fragrance. And so right off the bat, when you first spray, what is instantly apparent to you in this fragrance is that this is a 80s, animalic fragrance that is a dichotomy in and of itself because it is a blend between cleanliness and it's a blend between animalics, okay? And so that animalic blend between cleanliness and dirty is a vibe that other fragrances from the 80s played with. And most notable fragrance from the 80s that played with that clean, dirty dichotomy is YSL's Kouros, Pierre Bourdon's masterpiece, if you will. And so, you know, YSL Kouros is to me the master of the clean, dirty dichotomy, and that uses civet. And many people think the civet can come across as very pissy, a very pissy vibe, you know, if you will. Some people describe it as a urinal cake. I don't get that, but that's the consensus with Kouros. And there is a big animalic part to Kouros, if you will. And I found a vintage bottle of Man Pure. And on the vintage bottle, here is basically how Jill Sander describes the note pyramid. The top is spicy, bitter, aromatic, okay? The mid is balsamic, and the dry out, that's what the Germans called it on the bottle. I love it. The dry out is animalized, is how they represent the base. And this uses castorium, okay? Doesn't use civet, it uses castorium. And there were other famous fragrances from the 80s that used castorium, most notably Chanel's Antaeus. This is from 1981, and this is from 1981, okay? Now I'm going off of memory because my server's down on the computer, of course. As soon as I turn the video on, the server crashes. So I can't look anything up or see anything, but I'm going off of memory here. And so many people ask me, is there anything, I actually just got an email before I started this video. Someone was asking, is there anything like Antaeus? You know, is there anything that does what Antaeus does? No. To me, this is unique. This is a very special use of castorium because it uses that Chanel sparkle, that high class, upper class vibe that Chanel gives you in all of their perfumes. There's this air of sophistication with Chanel, and somehow they managed to mix in one of the most beautiful animalic castoriums I've ever smelled in my life in the vintage Antaeus. It is just, even smelling it from the cap just makes me melt, right? There were other fragrances from the 80s that use this animalic type fragrance or scent, and the castorium, if you will. The one that is probably closest to Jill Sander Man Pure is Jules. Dior Jules. This is a vintage bottle of Jules. And it is a beautiful green leather castorium. Oh God, it's so good. It's made by Jean Martel, the same person who did Paco Rabanne Pour Homme. And really, those are his two main masculines he made. And what two, I mean, Paco Rabanne Pour Homme and Jules. It's a shame he didn't do more because he obviously had a magic touch for masculine perfume. But I'm just giving you a feel for the 80s, okay? Now, what is interesting about the 80s is this. Is at the same time while YSL Kouros, Antaeus, Jules was coming out, there were also fragrances coming out like this. This came out in 1980, if memory serves. I don't have the internet to look it up, but if memory serves. This is Santos de Cartier. This is a vintage bottle of Santos de Cartier with the insane gold-silver clash. And this is actually a great representation of the fragrance because, yes, it's 80s. Yes, it has a little bit of dirtiness to it, but just a little bit. This is nothing like Kouros. This is nothing like Antaeus. This is sophistication in a bottle, if you will. It signals to me, even in the early 80s, that there was a shift going on. And later in the 80s, of course, in the mid-80s and later in the 80s, Pierre Bourdon will basically place his marker. He'll plant his flag as doing something to me which is revolutionary. In the same decade, issuing the most reference animalic fragrance you can imagine with Kouros, and then issuing the reference freshie with Green Irish Tweed / Cool Water. You can put those two together because Cool Water is basically Green Irish Tweed with some more additions, is the way Pierre Bourdon describes it. That Green Irish Tweed was released and it was like an early iteration, if you will. That's what he said. And so it's very interesting when you think about back in time and you think about long-term trends of the market, not, you know, perfume to perfume, but the trends of the market and what people really enjoy wearing and you know, what they're buying with their dollars. And so you think about that shift from animalics to more fresher fragrances, not as animalic fragrances, and you already see it happening in the early 80s. Again, think about like animalics versus fresh, right? And that clash. You also see it to me in this. Someone mentioned that this reminds them of Antaeus. I don't get Antaeus in this at all. I get much more of something like Santos. Oscar de la Renta Pour Louis, to me, is a very well-behaved fragrance, very classy, even in the vintage. This is a Sanofi Beauty bottle. Even in the vintage, it is, there's, again, a little hint of the animalics, but it's nothing like Koros, nothing like Antaeus to me. So the market is already shifting, okay? That's what I want you to keep in the back of your mind. Jil Sander, which, by the way, this is what an example of what one of their bottles looks like. This is Jil Sander Man. This came out at the end of the 80s, or Jil Sander Feeling Man, if you will. They're both the same fragrance, Feeling Man or Man. And this is a beautiful take on, this is Drakkar Noir perfected for me, because there's this fruity raspberry in here. It's perfect. There's tobacco. It's just, I hardly ever want to reach for Drakkar Noir, even though I love it, because I want to wear Jil Sander Man if I ever get the urge to wear that DNA. But the reason I bring all this up is that this fragrance, Jil Sander Man Pure from 1981, is in the Santos de Cartier Oscar de la Renta. It's going into the cleaner, fresher side of things, which, before you turn off, okay, before you hit stop and say, I'm not listening to another word Ramsey says, I want you to understand something, that this is a proper 80s fragrance through and through, all right? So even though I don't have the note listing in front of me anymore since the computer crashed, I will tell you that there is a big dose of castorium in the base, and there's a big dose of oak moss, large amount of oak moss in the base here, okay? And so everything that's vintage from this house of Jil Sander that I've tried has captured my attention. It really has. It's really just grabbed me. And I would urge you to go watch those other Jil Sander videos that I did. They are on my to-buy list. They are, you know, right there at the top of my to-buy list. So, again, what makes this so interesting outside of the history? And, you know, you will see the transition happen in the decade, in the 80s, as that's my favorite fragrance decade, if you will. But what's so interesting about this perfume, to me anyways, and maybe I'm just being too philosophical, or maybe I've just spent too much time thinking about this one fragrance, because I have spent a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to say on this video, because even though this is niche content, I don't think there's very few people that are clamoring to learn about Jil Sander Man Pure. In fact, I don't even think there's people that knew Jil Sander Man Pure existed. I didn't. When Duncan sent it to me, I had no idea. I had to do research on it. But this fragrance is a microcosm of the 80s in one fragrance, is the way that I look at it, because it is both. It's aromatic in the top. It's got beautiful sage, and it has, outside of the sage, it has a couple other aromatic notes. Oregano is one of them. There's an oregano note in here, even though I can't see the note breakdown. And there's a green basil note. And that green basil note is very prominent in the opening. And what ends up happening is, as you get to the second stage of this perfume, there becomes this fresh, soapy vibe that begins to come to the fore. Okay, and that fresh, soapy vibe is exactly the opposite of whatever mental image you are expecting a fresh, soapy fragrance to have. Whatever the opposite of what you're thinking is what this is. This is nothing like the fresh soapies of the 90s. And I'm going to do an entire, this is not a top 10 on fresh soapy fragrances one day soon, because that's a category I haven't done one yet on. But the 80s fresh soapy fragrances, to me, are completely different. Even the 70s fresh soapy fragrance, Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, has a little bit of freshness to it. And this is just an amazing take on a fragrance because of the, you know, it's such a great representation of the 80s in one fragrance. It's got that green, aromatic, oregano, basil, clary sage top, and then it begins to dry into this beautiful soapy fragrance that you think is just going to last and last, and then it takes another turn. And that other turn is where the animalics from the base rise up, and that's where you get the castorium, the labdanum. There's a note of spicy nutmeg, tart, spicy nutmeg in the base, in the dry down. And that's what makes it so unique. So here is kind of the way that the fragrance develops. So when you first spray, you get that aromatic sage, clary sage, oregano, spices, basil, that kind of thing. Green, it's a little bit green, and there's some spicy carnation in there, okay? Old school 80s spicy carnation, which I love. And what makes this so interesting is that initial opening salvo, okay? The spicy, bitter, aromatic spices that Man Pure has on the tester bottle. Somehow they found a way to make those spicy, aromatic notes last. So as the pyramid, you know, you've got your fragrance pyramid and the top, and it begins to, you know, it's almost like you can erase the fragrance pyramid as it evaporates, right? For somehow, some way, the top doesn't evaporate. It doesn't. The spices, the sage, somehow just lasts and lasts and lasts. And I keep expecting it to disappear. And it doesn't. They found a way to make this aromatic top last somehow. And it really lasts into the heart. It doesn't dissipate for hours even. Hours and hours into the dry down, or the dry out, as the Germans would say. So the first 2 hours tick by, and what you'll find is you're expecting that sage, oregano to evaporate, mugwort, a little bit of artemisia, I think. That's my guess. I don't think it's listed in the note pyramid, but a little bit of artemisia is in here as well. And you expect it to, you know, begin to dry, and it doesn't. And I mentioned Dior Jules is probably being the closest thing to what you will expect this fragrance to kind of turn into, but it doesn't turn into Jules. Jules came out, I think, a year before Man Pure. So I think it's pretty fair to say that Dior Jules influenced Man Pure. It was 1 year earlier. This is Dior we're talking about. Big masculine. They are obviously signaling to the market, hey, this is the future. And so Jil Sander, being a smaller brand, obviously took notice. But what I love about it is that they didn't copy Dior Jules. Not in the sense that you would expect them to. There are some slight similarities. There's a hint here and there, right? But this is almost like you took Dior Jules and you cut off that 70s long haircut that Dior Jules had, and you remove the leather completely, which you're probably saying, wait a minute, the leather's gone? Ramsey's not going to like it. I do. I like this because of the way it's constructed and the way that there's this vision. You can see, first of all, you can see the attention to detail. Second of all, you can definitely tell the high quality ingredients in here. There is no question on my mind that this is as good as any Roja Dove, any Xerjoff, any high-end niche brand that's asking insane money for their creations. This is just as good, okay? If not better, right? Because it's using stuff that they can't use today, no matter how much money you pay them. And so that's kind of where it's almost like Dior Jules got a haircut, got a professional job, went out to the workforce, settled down, right? It's a more mature Jules. And I don't mean mature as in the way, because this is a very mature fragrance. People think, this is like tweed jackets and that kind of stuff. But I mean in the sense that this is a cleaner, more grown-up fragrance to me. Jules has a rebellious side. It has this, I think the name Jules technically translated to pimp. And the guy on the front, if you go look up old Dior advertising, he's like got this black jacket. He's turned away. He's smoking a cigarette. It was that vibe that they were trying to give off. This cleans up the bad boy vibe to me. Okay, that's just what I'm imagining as I'm wearing this and as it's breaking down. And so Dior Jules now has a family. He's settled down, and what ends up happening is that aromatic top blends beautifully with that soapy mid. Okay, and this is probably my favorite soapy fragrance, if not my favorite soapy fragrances, because I think that it is very hard to do soapy fragrances. And the reason I think it's very hard to do soapy fragrances is that they have to be so perfectly well balanced. Just a little bit too much in one area, and it smells like cheap soap, right? Not enough, and it's almost you're not going to pick up the fact that it's supposed to be this soapy fragrance. And what they've done here so beautifully is the balance. You get the herbs, the aromatic top, you get the oregano, the sage, the artemisia, which I think is in here even though it's not listed. You get the basil, all that stuff I mentioned. And it just blends into this heart. The geranium is what I think adds this cleanness to it. Geranium can sometimes come across as very clean and soapy. It can also sometimes come across as very spicy and clove-like. Carnation can come across as the clove-like feel. Sorry, geranium I think can come across as very spicy sometimes, and rose almost like rose-like. Here it's the soapy quality geranium that you get. It's almost like geranium soap. If you've ever smelled the geranium in Andy Towers' Lone Star Memories, how that geranium soap washes away, the cowboy sitting by the fire with the leather goods and the coffee cup mug, and I've talked about that on a video many a times. This has that clean geranium soap, but not in a modern niche like Andy Towers fragrance, in a vintage from the 80s, okay? And why that's so important is that it really balances aspects of the fragrance that I love, that I know and love. And so it does such a fantastic job of taking a fragrance that doesn't have the leather of Jill Sander Man 2. It doesn't have the soapiness of something like, a modern Prada. You're definitely not going to mistake Jill Sander Man Pure for Prada Amber Porome, one of the best soapy fragrances of all time, by the way. But this is totally different level of perfumery because Man Pure is definitely in its element in the 1980s. It is, again, signaling the future with that soapiness in the mid, and it has this warmth from castorium. So even though it doesn't have the leather, the castorium gives off this warmth. And what I found so interesting about this is that the castorium that Jill Sander uses, and I noticed it in Man 2 as well, is that it smells very unique to any other castorium fragrance I've ever smelled. It doesn't smell like the castorium in Antaeus. It doesn't smell like the castorium Dior used. It doesn't smell like the castorium in something like Caractère, right? It smells completely different. It smells like Jill Sander castorium, which means they really had a vision, a plan. It's very distinct and it's very professional, and the castorium even somehow smells clean, if that makes sense. It's very strange to say castorium smells clean. And while you can distinguish that it is animalic castorium, your nose will pick up on a slight bit of dirtiness. It's nothing like the dirty castorium bombs from the 80s. And so that's why I think they've managed to create something amazing with this. And it's a shame it's discontinued. because it does so many different facets, and it does all of those different facets to perfection. It's almost like a football team practicing each area of the game, right? They've got their special teams down, they've got their defense down, they've got their offense down. This has this beautiful top, and you have no clue where this is going to go when it opens. I mean, it could go in a million directions, and then it takes that turn for the soapy, and you're thinking, okay, maybe it's going to smell cheap, maybe it's going to smell rushed, not done very well, not my cup of tea. But for someone like me who loves animalic fragrances, this is a king soapy fragrance. I mean, this is one of the best soapy fragrances I've smelled, if not the best soapy fragrance I've ever smelled, because those herbs last, you know, somehow they've found the way to make those herbs last into the dry down. And yet, once you get to the base and you've experienced hours and hours of that soapy, clean 80s masculine vibe, the animalics start to, like, you know, heat up from below. And you get some of the resins, you get the labdanum, you get the big oak moss in the base that adds that texture that we all love, that's missing from modern perfumery. And nutmeg just kind of puts a bow on everything. It's that spices, the tart spiciness of nutmeg that keeps everything in line. You know, it's exactly where it's supposed to be. This is a fantastic example of what we've lost in modern perfumery, because, you know, this, I don't see any house, be it Dior, YSL, Creed, Roja Dove, I mean, you name any house you want on the niche side, on the cheaper side, more expensive side. I just do not see this kind of perfumery coming back, is the sad part about it. So you can go spend $1,000 on a Roja Dove, right? You can go spend $800 on a Bodicea, the overpriced if you want. But Man Pure, or these 80s fragrances from the past, they really do something for me that no modern fragrance I've ever encountered can do. No modern fragrance can put together a perfect game like this. You know, this is bowling a 300. This is a perfect game. And I love it. I think for me personally, I love Jill Sander Man 2 a little bit more because it's more focused on the leather and all that stuff, whereas this is missing the leather. But man, if you want a soapy fragrance, I don't think I've come across one that can satisfy all aspects like this. And that's a special, very special, hard thing to do. And I'm sure in 1981 that Jill Sander wasn't thinking that this was going to be a microcosm for 80s perfume, but it turned out to be. I mean, it's that dichotomy of silver and gold, you know, clean and dirty, with the spices, the brown spices mixed in there, that 80s fragrance that we love. And what's crazy about it is how many other fragrances from the 80s no one knows about, no one talks about, would I have a similar reaction to? Whereas how many fragrances today would I put under my nose and go, shite, not worth it, you know, cheap amber woods or whatever it is. You know, it's a blessing to be able to wear this, honestly. I feel very blessed to have this opportunity because, you know, I know that there's many people who, even if they wanted to smell this, they couldn't find it. It would be impossible to find, you know, and having a YouTube channel gives me that advantage where people have sent me stuff like this. And I took this and I threw it with my samples, and that was 6 months ago. Now I'm just randomly pulling it back out and talking about it again. So it's kind of bittersweet for me because I love talking about this because no one else is talking about it. They're all talking about whatever the newest thing is. And, but on the other side, I mean, this deserves to go on the watch list. Actually, every single Jill Sander I've ever smelled from the old days deserves to be on the watch list. They are amazing perfumes. And, you know, even in the vintage community, I don't think they get the love that they deserve. So I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have experience with Jill Sander Man Pure, I'd love to know if you think I'm on the mark, if I'm crazy, if I'm, you know, if I've lost the plot, whatever you want to call it. But if you have, or Jill Sander perfumes in general, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Jill Sander, the brand, because I think they're still releasing stuff. I mean, it's not like the brand is gone. It's just they are not what they used to be. And so I will cherish these. I really, Duncan, I really appreciate you sending this to me, mate. I still have some more stuff you've sent to me I haven't had a chance to talk about yet. But this kind of rights a wrong of letting this just sit on the shelf, because, man, what a joy this has been wearing this today so far. So thank you very much. Appreciate everyone watching. As always, the support is very much appreciated and welcomed. And hope everyone has a great weekend. I'll hopefully talk to you tomorrow. Cheers. Okay. Bye, guys.